Darrion Williams is officially coming back to school, and Bill Self in Kansas trying to close the deal as he's been on campus visiting KU.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks, and thank you for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching all of our shows, whether you're finding us on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show, or anywhere that we're available, where you get your podcast. Thank you for joining us on the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're talking Darrion Williams, guy that I've dubbed as the number one portal target for KU for a long time. Well, he's officially back in school. He was at the NBA Draft Combine. He's coming back to college, visiting KU. We're going to get into all that and more. Plus, there's some interesting quotes and comments from Bill Self that he gave to CJ Moore of The Athletic, specifically talking about Elmarko Jackson, that he was almost a starter. What does that mean for this year's team? And we'll get to some of the latest news, including on Dan Fitzgerald and elsewhere with possible more international targets, and on and on and on the offseason goes with KU. Let's start with some Darrion Williams talk, though, as Darrion Williams officially this morning, I guess if you're listening to this on Wednesday, then it would be yesterday morning. But Tuesday morning, Darrion Williams officially exited the NBA draft process, that according to John Rothstein and Jeff Goodman. And it was something where he didn't have the best combine necessarily. Like in some of the scrimmages, the stats weren't there. He struggled a little bit here. Didn't measure out super great. I don't know that he was ever somebody who was expected to measure super great to begin with. But even then, like, you know, you're hoping if you're him, you don't want to measure 6'4.5" without shoes when you're mostly a 4-man. But obviously we know he's a very productive college player, and none of that stuff bothers me in terms of, should KU not want him anymore because he measured 6'4.5" without? No, KU should still want this dude. He's a stud at the collegiate level at the very least. So comes back from the NBA draft officially. Then Eric Bossy of 24/7 Sports reports that he is in Lawrence on a visit, and it's very interesting, the timing of all of this, but it feels like things are getting real now, because it feels like for a long time we were in a waiting period. We were in a just kind of, okay, well, let's wait and see what happens with the combine, and let's get closer to the NBA draft deadline in terms of, are you going to stay in? Are you going to withdraw away from the draft? And now it feels like, okay, finally we're getting some action. We're going to get some movement on whatever is going to happen one way or another, whether he's going to pick KU or whether he's not, and where KU goes from here. But this is also a pivotal moment in the offseason, because can Bill Self close the door, as we've seen him do time and time again? You've heard the term spring Bill, that he always comes through seemingly with that one big piece he needs to in the spring. And so with Williams, NC State, who clearly has a resurgence, with Will Wade, who obviously can make strong offers himself. Ohio State is somebody of interest, like going back to Tech, I guess, is a possibility. I don't know. It seems like it's mostly Kansas and NC State that you hear from, but maybe those are on the forefront as well. Can Bill Self close the door and get this done for Darrion Williams? Now, he did mention in an interview that was given during the draft, like the big thing for him was going to be about development and what school can kind of raise his stock in the NBA draft. Like, those are going to be key things. Like, he has been a winning basketball player. He has been a productive basketball player at the collegiate level. He is a little less concerned with what role is he going to have on a team, and he shouldn't be that concerned, because not that he shouldn't be concerned with the role, but I think he's viewing it from a standpoint, and this is how I would view it if I were him. He's a good enough player that no matter where he goes, he's going to have a role on the team, and a big role on the team. So it's more about who can send you to the next level. Well, if you're Kansas, the thing you have to offer him is the idea of, okay, you're going to play next to a rim protector, which is going to help you on defense. And on the offensive end of the floor, you're going to get to play next to Darren Peterson, which is both going to open you up for more opportunities with the attention drawn on him, but it's also going to put a lot of NBA scout eyeballs on all the Kansas games this season, which is probably a good thing for you, assuming you're going to have a good season, which, you know, if you're Darrion Williams, you would assume you're going to have a good season because you're a good basketball player, right? So those are reasons you would pick KU. The reason to pick NC State would maybe be more so like, he could be the guy. He could be the dude, you know, and put up monstrous numbers. I would think, though, like, if you're Darrion Williams, right now he's projected, if he would have stayed in this draft, as like an early to mid second round pick. And I guess that was before the stuff that happened. So I don't know, where he would slot at this point in time. But based on, where he's projected to be, if you're going to be a second round draft pick, you're not somebody that an NBA franchise is bringing in with the idea that you're going to be a franchise altering player, that you're going to be the dude. They're bringing you in under the idea of, okay, we think you can be a good role player for this team. We hope that maybe you can develop into one of our starters, or that you can be a key bench player, whatever it ends up being. And so wouldn't you almost want to replicate the best opportunity? Like, if you're saying, hey, I go to Kansas, I get to play off of Darrion Peterson. This is going to get frustrating. Darrion and Darren. Anyway, if you get to play off of Darrion Peterson and succeed in that role, then NBA teams are like, oh, hey, we have this stud, on the ball player. We have a Trae Young. We have a Jason Tatum. We have whoever it is, and we know you can play off of them like you did with Darrion Peterson, who's going to go top 3 in the draft, right? That can be very beneficial to him. Now, all that said, you got to get the right money offer too. Like, that, I don't think is something he said, but that probably is the quiet thing behind all of these recruits. Like, you can't be beat on the money offer here. If you can get to the same number as these other schools that are in the running, do you lean back on all the other things that you have to offer that can be enough? But you got to be there with that strong offer to kind of match what anybody else is doing. And the last thing you want here is kind of extending out the recruiting battle. I will say something that gives me like a lot of hope here is kind of the coincidence, so to speak, of the timing of all of this. Think about this. It gets announced on Tuesday morning that he is withdrawing from the NBA draft. And then we find out later in the day he is visiting Kansas. Are we naive enough to think that, not that somebody's trying to pull one over on us for this, but like, are we naive enough to think that, oh, he announced he's going to be withdrawing from the draft in the morning, and immediately after Bill Self called him up and said, hey, I'm going to send you a private plane and you're going to come visit Kansas. And he's like, okay, let's do that. No. If he was visiting Kansas, this had to be planned out in advance. Now, how long in advance? Could it have been a day? Could it have been 2 days? That can be up in the air. But there's no way it was all happened in one day where he made that decision and Kansas was like, oh, crap, let's get you on this last-minute flight right now. This had to be planned a little bit more in advance. And that makes me think that maybe things are a little bit further along than you might actually think, because clearly there's been some sort of communication there that was behind closed doors. Because again, that wouldn't add up that it would all just have to happen in one day. It seems like there was a little bit more of a plan here than you would kind of indicate. The other beauty of this is the recruiting dead period is coming up here. And so what that means is that with Darrion Williams, he's not going to get a chance to visit these other schools unless he waits till the beginning of June, when the recruiting dead period comes to a close, which can go either way. If this recruitment lasts longer and he doesn't commit in the next, whatever week, 2 weeks, then that's going to make you worried that, okay, he's waiting to visit other schools. But if he's making a decision soon, that gives you hope that you would be the one in the end. And so going back to just how pivotal this is, with Sarr kind of feeling like that's a do clean at this point, like this feels like the best chance to maximize what this team can be. Like, there's still some other options that are out there, especially internationally, I guess, like Jameer Watkins and stuff. There are some options out there. But the 100th percentile outcome, the best outcome that is still available for KU that is left in this offseason, to me, involves landing Darrion Williams. It kind of starts and ends with that. And so it does become a little bit of panic mode if Darrion Williams picks another school. That'll be super interesting how that impacts negotiations, because they probably know too that, like, yeah, you really need him too. So what are you willing to offer, right? But overall, I love me some Darrion Williams, and I wouldn't let a lower performance for him at the NBA draft combine like sour you at all on what he is. It was just a few days of bad basketball. He's more of a team playing guy. Like, you go back and look at Nevada's 13-18. He shows up as a freshman. They go 22-11. Texas Tech goes 16-16. He shows up as a transfer. They go 23-11. His net ratings the last 3 years, on-off net rating, Tech was almost 15 points better this year. They were 13 points better the year before, and Nevada was almost 25 points better per 100 possessions when he was on the floor. He is a winning player, and so some of those scrimmage settings can be more about like the guys who are just athletes and going to get out in an open gym and run and get, easy cherry-picked buckets and stuff like that. what we know is Darrion Williams is a heck of a college basketball player. He was a first-team All-Big 12 player. Everywhere he's gone, they have been better, and I think that would be the case with Kansas as well. So we'll keep an eye on that one as well. But what about Elmarko Jackson and some other comments that Bill Self had about this current team with CJ Moore of The Athletic? We'll get to that next. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to win big and play it smart. Plus, with FanDuel, you can get early action on the college football season. You can also get early action on the college basketball season. How about this? Right now, as I'm recording, Kansas is 16-1 to win the national title. I think last year they were around 12-1. Right now, Purdue's 11-1 is the favorite, tied with Duke at 11-1, Houston at 12-1. If Kansas lands Darrion Williams, they're probably closer to 11-12, maybe 14-1. I don't know. Maybe now is the time to get in on it. New to FanDuel, it's perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If you win, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks as we get into some of these interesting quotes. So the first one I want to talk about is with Elmarko Jackson. So there's a really good article in The Athletic from CJ Moore. There's great work on this stuff, and I'm not going to go over every quote. I'm not going to go over every piece in the article. You should get a subscription to The Athletic and check it out yourself. But one of the most prominent ones that was in there was Bill Self talking about Elmarko Jackson and back to his freshman year when things weren't very good for Elmarko. Like, I went back and I was looking at some Quentin Grimes stuff, just Twitter interactions, exchanges. Quentin Grimes had like an 8.7 PER, which is very bad. That was the worst of any Bill Self player since that stat, which I think is like 2009, 2010, who played 20 or more minutes per game. Elmarko didn't play 20 or more minutes. It was like 18 minutes per game, but Elmarko's would have actually been lower. It was like 6 point something. So it was not a good freshman year for Elmarko Jackson, but he got thrown into the fire. And this is something that Bill Self said. He said, quote, too much, too fast. He wasn't ready for that role. But if you remember that Kansas team, Nick Timberlake didn't take that role down, and there wasn't enough depth on that team that you had to play Elmarko more minutes than he was ready for, which was probably a little unfair to him. But like, to Elmarko's credit, he kept trying at it, and Elmarko was actually a very good defender at the very least on that end of the ball. But here's what's interesting. In the story, it says Self said there was no doubt he was going to be a starter last year before the offseason injury. So, and I guess it makes sense, right? And I don't know how much of that is he thought that was going to be the case coming into the year versus he just looks back on it that way now, where he's like, yeah, Rylan Griffin didn't do enough for me. If we would have had Elmarko, it would have been Elmarko starting, him and DeJuan, and then Zeke Mayo would have basically been the three at that point in time. And but he also said, Self, quote, he's had an unbelievable rehab year. He'll be better than he ever has been before. Now, it's important to remember, Bill Self has had some all-timers in the offseason with blowing guys up. Zach Clements, the most improved player on the team. Quentin Grimes, the most complete guard we've had here. Bobby Pettiford, some hype there with being a great guy. Like, there has been lots of ones that have not always worked out. Sometimes you just get the offseason hype because you want to hype up the player, right? You want to give them confidence, or you want to hype up the fan base, right? There's different reasons that you would do some of that stuff. So you do have to take it with a grain of salt. But point being, if he's had an unbelievable rehab year, that's the one where I'm like, okay, you could say he'll be better than he ever has before. That part is one of those where it's like, okay, I don't know. We'll see on that. But it makes sense. He's getting older. He does get better. It's the great rehab year that concerns me, or doesn't concern. That's a bad word choice. That enlightens me, I guess, because the whole idea I've had is, okay, point guard especially, that's a position where you're going to really need things to slow down for you. And if they're going too fast for you in your freshman year, that's like that and center are the hardest positions for that to happen. And so with Elmarko, it seemed like he was playing well in the offseason. He suffers the injury. So the question coming into this year was, okay, are you getting a third-year former McDonald's All-American who's ready to break out? Or does the fact that he's coming off a season-ending injury, where a lot of times guys coming off season-ending injuries, it takes them time to get back, they have to shake the rust off, does that neutralize the improvements in Elmarko's game? the fact that he's saying that about the rehab tells me that maybe it won't neutralize the improvements that he's had. Maybe he will be a real player. So honestly, like, is there a chance Elmarko starts on this team? Yes, I think there is. I think right now you pencil it in as I would Sharpie in Darren Peterson. I would Sharpie in Floyd Badunga as starters. I at this point probably Sharpie in Trey White because you don't really have any other wings on the team. And then after that, it's like, okay, who are going to be the other two starters, right? If you add a player like Darrion Williams, or we think they're going to add some other big splash player, whether it's Williams or somebody international or whatever, maybe you'd say that's one of the other starters. And then it's like, okay, you have a guard, Melvin Council, you have Jaden Dawson, you have Elmarko Jackson. Maybe from a shooting perspective, it makes the most sense for it to be Jaden Dawson. Seems like the staff very high on Melvin Council, but if Elmarko, like if you're making comparisons of what Elmarko could be to Melvin Council, both athletic guards who should be good at driving into the paint, maybe have some questions about their three-point shooting, should be good defenders. But Elmarko's had more time in the system now, and if the staff is really high on both, I don't know. Maybe there's a chance that Elmarko could be one of the other starters on the team. At the very least, I think it tells you this. Elmarko Jackson's going to be in for a big role. And I don't know that that necessarily is a surprise, but like, I think Elmarko could be in a big enough role this year and show good enough flashes this year to where and not only is he having contributions on this team, but you're going, okay, in another year from now, when Elmarko at that point would be a redshirt junior or a fourth-year player or whatever, and Darren Peterson graduates, Elmarko's ready to take over the reins as the guy on the team. Like, that would not surprise me in a real way. So cool to see that stuff from Bill Self. The other thing that I wanted to mention from the quotes, and again, there's many more good quotes in there and good stuff from CJ Moore, but it was talking about Bill Self in recruiting portal. He said, quote, recruit fits rather than talent. That's something we've talked about all off season long. So it's good to see that's kind of been the idea here. He said, interchangeable parts, versatility. We want guys that can shoot, but guys that could beat their man off the bounce, that can touch the paint off the dribble, that don't need a ball screen all the time to get there. That's what I thought we obviously didn't have last year. They want guys who can create, right? You have that with Melvin Council. You have it a little bit with Trey White. You're trying to get it with Darrion Williams, trying to get basically bucket getters. We talk about this all the time, but also looking for good fits. And it seems like Kansas has done that very well. But none of it works if you don't add that one other good player, because if you have just too many role players, then it's like, okay, you don't have enough pop. If you get the right amount of star players or all conference players, which you have with Darren Peterson and possibly Floyd Badunga, if you can get that one more, like a Darrion Williams, then those role players, it's like, this is perfect. You found the right fits for the rest of the roster around you. So I think some interesting quotes. And again, you can check out that full article in The Athletic. Okay, let's get to some of the latest news, including internationally, in the transfer portal, Dan Fitzgerald, KU baseball, NCAA basketball, fifth-year stuff as a whole, hiring freezes and layoffs, all the likes coming up on Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. All right, latest news. There's a lot to get to. This one, quick touch on. We had a deep dive on Boogie Fland. He is going to Florida. He committed to Florida, was on a visit. And so I think, looking back on it, we mentioned this when we had the deep dive. We weren't sure, like, is this real interest or is this just, maybe agents trying to drive up price a little bit with him? Probably a little bit more of that. Now, I would believe Kansas checked in, do your due diligence, right? But I don't know. That seems to have made more sense, but that's a good pickup, I think, for Florida. I guess another name to keep an eye on, and maybe this would be one that I don't know. Is it possible that they could land Darrion Williams and one of these international studs, or the international studs backup plans Darrion Williams? And if you do land Darrion Williams, then it puts you in a different pool of players. I don't know, but I talked about some international recruits on a recent episode. Thank you to the everydayers who already caught that one. But Marko Radunovic is a 6'6" wing from Montenegro, playing with KK Podgorica in the Montenegrin First League and the ABA, like the Baltic League Second Division. He would go up there. I mentioned that you'd have Avdalis as the number one among the guys I talked about on, I think that was Monday's show, and I'd have Henshaw as the number two. Henshaw, I just loved his game. Avdalis is the better fit for KU. But I would put Radunovic up with Avdalis. I mean, you could make an argument for Radunovic over Avdalis. You could go kind of either way with that, but Radunovic 18-year-old, 26 games played in the combination of those two competitions, about 23 minutes per game, 11.2 points per game, 5.5 rebounds per game, 2 assists per game, 1.2 steals, 0.6 blocks as a 6'6 wing, just does a little bit of everything. And what's really impressive is the shooting percentages, 49.5 from the field, 36.5 from three, 74.7 at the line. Now, the beauty of Avdalis is he's a little bit taller. He's like 2 or 3 inches taller. So you get more of a guy that maybe you'd feel a little more comfortable playing the 4, even though Avdalis can dribble and play more like a wing, whereas Radunovic is maybe more of a true 3. But you could make an argument for either guy. And so, if you don't land Darrion Williams, then maybe he's the guy you go to. Maybe it's Avdalis that you can try to get in on that recruitment as well. I don't know. Porque no los dos, right? Try to get Williams and this guy. I don't know. Anyway, he would certainly be a fun one. Speaking of European basketball, though, this was interesting. Eurohoops tweeted this out. Faced with rising departures of young players to the NCAA's lucrative NIL deals, Real Madrid and Barcelona reportedly considering shutting down youth academies and reallocating resources directly to their first teams. That'll be very interesting because there's been some interesting articles that have come out about how college is changing the game for these international clubs, because a lot of times if they lose their player to sign with the NBA or to the NBA draft, they're getting a buyout. But if the kid goes to college, even though the college is paying that player to come with NIL money, they're not giving a buyout to the team. So it'll be kind of interesting because it feels like there's a big flood of international talent. Last year there was, and this year there's going to be one, and maybe it just will be moving forward. That's kind of the new money ball. Like, where can you find good talent for a little bit cheaper than on the transfer portal, or where can you unearth even more talent that maybe you find some more diamonds in the rough. KU baseball news as well. Dan Fitzgerald won Big 12 baseball coach of the year, which is well deserved there for Dan Fitzgerald. It is crazy, thinking that okay, with how good Bill Self and Lance Leipold have been at KU, that the combination of Bill Self and Lance Leipold haven't won a Big 12 coach of the year for Kansas since 2018, despite the fact that, again, KU football has had this amazing, come up reversal of where they had been. Bill Self has had so many great teams since 2018 in the Big 12, and that they haven't won one. Dan Fitzgerald deserves it, and it makes sense that he won it. I just think it's funny that KU doesn't have more of those Big 12 coach of the years in the different sports. But got to be a tough time for Travis Goff, because you're sitting there and we'll get to this next thing in a moment here, stadium funding, NIL funding. You got to figure out, you're probably going to have to extend Dan Fitzgerald and give him a raise, after doing this. You don't want him leaving to another school, right? Probably got to work on KU baseball facilities, got to work on getting the funding for Darrion Williams. It's a tough time to be an athletic director and to be the KU athletic director, specifically because of the football project and the stadium and everything. And part of that, unfortunately, there was a LJ World just reported this today, a hiring freeze and layoffs happening at Kansas, which I think 30% is what they were saying in the story. Saves them $3 million, which is crazy to think that $3 million of those employees that's a lot of employees, and it's one of those things where it just sucks, because you see some of these high figures that are going around for building facilities, or that are going to coaches or NIL or whatever, and you see a player, okay, this guy's getting $3 million to come into Lawrence for 6 months, and you see these people losing their jobs. It sucks. And, it's unfortunately the nature of how things are going now with this whole rev share thing, and KU has to find a way to get money. It's also unfortunate. I've talked a lot about this, and this isn't just a Kansas thing. This is a college athletics as a whole thing. College athletics, athletic departments across the country they're just bad with money, because what happens is, you go look at college budgets from 20 years ago. You go look at college budgets from 20 years ago, and let's say the budget, this is not an accurate number, but let's say the budget 20 years ago is $10 million, and let's say the budget now is $30 million. It's not all of a sudden they've gone, oh, hey, now that we're making $30 million, we're profiting $10 million per year, even though the budget, no, because what happens is, when your profit goes up with these athletic departments, when you get a new TV deal that's making you more money, they spend it all right away. So it doesn't end up being a situation where it's like KU could go from making $50 million to all of a sudden making $100 million next year. And it wouldn't be, okay, we ended up having a budget of $70 million and a $30 million surplus. It would all of a sudden turn into, okay, no, now we just spent the $100 million. And part of that is the NCAA system, right? Like, I think Grand Canyon is a for-profit university. University of Kansas and many of these other universities aren't for-profit universities. So they have to spend what they make in. They have to end up, neutral or I guess in the red at the end of the year. So it's a weird system to be around. But with this becoming more like professional sports, can we figure out a way to not have this happen? Can we figure out a way where, hey, if you get more money now on your TV deal, you don't have to spend it right away? So that way we can keep these people's jobs. I don't know. That's more of a big picture thing. That's not just a Kansas thing, obviously. So best wishes to all the people who lost their jobs, and I hope they land on their feet. That's for sure. The last one here is Zakai Ziegler, Tennessee guard, played 4 years for the Volunteers. He is suing the NCAA for a 5th year. Now, we've heard some rumblings about could they allow a 5th year with some of these players? Would it even be backlogged anyway? The fact that we're now getting legal action could speed up that process. And if this passes, what's going to then stop somebody from, in a year from now, being like, oh, well, now I'm suing, I want a 6th year. You know what I mean? So this will be very interesting to monitor, and we'll see if because it wouldn't just impact, okay, KU could possibly have guys back. KU could look into the portal for players that would now all of a sudden be eligible, and the portal options would open up, and a lot of teams would have full rosters to where like maybe, they'd be able to find some cheap discounts to fall through. I don't know. It could be craziness. And honestly, I don't really want this to pass. Like, at some point, this is just going to become kind of too crazy if that's the situation. But if it does, it is going to be even more of the wild, wild west. But anyway, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back at you later this week to talk a little more KU basketball, a little more transfer portal, maybe even some KU football right here on Locked On Jayhawks.